Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Flynn, and we would like to begin by thanking the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating and streaming from today, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Pardon me. And we're joined by Jeremy Lord. Hello, illustrator from Sydney, Australia, recently back from a lovely trip to Japan.
Indeed. Hey, everybody. How you going, man?
I'm good. How's the jet lag?
It's actually not too bad. Japan is only 2 hours behind, but big
Right.
trip, very tired. Yeah, so still a little bit kind of in the fuzz, but wouldn't call it jet lag.
All right, fair enough. I always think just because it's a bit of a flight that, there's some sort of time difference. I'm so used to that when people leave the country, but there we go. That's good. You are back. And yeah, we're getting stuck into pixel art, like one of our favorite things to kind of cover. So much fun.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just getting stuck into like pixel art. It's one of the things that I kind of like to work with when I'm kind of doing just kind of a little bit of a side note for me in that sense of like I've got the stuff that I do, which is the kind of the clean line anime high res stuff. But every now and then it's good, like being a gamer, I like to kind of go back to the old school kind of 8-bit stuff and get into pixel art, which is actually compared to how I normally work and the tools that I have to use in Photoshop and the process that I follow in Photoshop doing my like quote unquote normal work. Pixel art is the complete opposite. So it's kind of a nice like it's like tree change from the stuff that I normally do. So yes, every now and then we kind of do these streams on pixel art, and I really enjoy working with that, and I think it's kind of like a popular way to work. Has its challenges and has its simplicities, as we'll see today and tomorrow. So yeah,
that's cool.
So,
sorry, just before we get stuck into it,
Photoshop?
we are live, everyone. So hello, few folks in chat. Frank's in chat. Alessandra, Dark Hours as well. We're live in a couple of places today. Sorry, my mic's a bit hot. We're live in a couple of places today. We're still going live on the global channel, the Adobe Live channel, but we're also going live on our OG original Asia Pacific channel. Just jumping in to say hi because we haven't done a stream there since last year, and just letting you know that we have moved. So we have some text up there, but maybe some people have missed it. So if you're watching this, wondering what happened to Adobe Live, we've moved over to the global channel. There will be a link at the description of the next couple of events to make sure that you jump across there. We're hanging out with a global audience who's super interested in Adobe Live and not just our channel. So really exciting time, heaps of fun. Jump on over and join us for more streams. So Jeremy, jumping into the stuff today, I love this. Let's geek out with this Gundam.
Yeah, so these are just like examples of kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about pixel art. It's a pretty common kind of theme, but yeah, talking about this like very stylized kind of like 8-bit kind of look, and generally kind of working around themes of like video game things, and trying to kind of tie that back into it because that's literally where it comes from. So I always kind of try and do artwork in pixel art that could potentially tie back into some kind of video game theme. And so you can see here it's like a little pizza slice and it's got a +100 because you eat food in video games and you get healthy.
Even pizza.
Eating pizza, yeah. So there's a bunch of different things here with pixel art to kind of talk about when we're kind of getting set up in the file. And we'll look at kind of like setting up brushes, files to kind of work with pixel art in Photoshop. But the first thing you need to kind of think about when you're starting a piece of like pixel art or any kind of art is what size you're going to go for. And we're normally kind of like with like the stuff that I normally do, that's going to be dictated to by the client, or like we need to print it at A1 or A2 or whatever else that might be, or what the dimensions and specs are of the file that they need. With pixel art, that's going to exist as well. But on top of that, you're going to have to consider what kind of style of pixel art you're going for. So here, what I've got is like 4 of the same kind of illustration, but done at various levels of pixel art, if you will. So we've got 16, 32, 64, 128, and that refers to kind of how many pixels wide this potion fits. So like a square canvas, that potion bottle fits in that square perfectly. We've got 16 by 16 pixels, 32 by 32, 64, so on and so on, right? Why 1632? Just because that's the multiples. That's what kind of you get with RAM. That's what you get with 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit. It's always kind of doubles up every time. And that's the progression of those numbers going all the way up to, 1040 or 1080, sorry, and so on and so forth. So with this is a kind of a good scale of like, you got to work the balance here of, on one hand, with the 128, we're afforded a lot of detail. We've got a lot of pixel information. We can really get down and dirty with this and kind of get a lot of detail and information imparted onto the viewer. But at potentially starting to kind of navigate into the waters of no longer pixel art, just kind of pixelated art, if you will. So if you want to kind of talk about it strictly, not to get too kind of nerdy about this, but all art is pixel art. All digital art is pixel art, really. It's all made of pixels. Just how many of them you put in there will kind of make that difference. So on one end here, we've got lots of detail. We can really impart a lot of information, but starting to lose that kind of 8-bit quality that we're going for. On the other end of the scale, we've got 16, which, like, if I zoom in up close, this is an absolute dog's breakfast. It's a mess. Can't see anything there. So you really have to view this from a distance to kind of try and see any sense from that.
Yeah.
And that's the point, right? These things are low res. They're not meant to be seen like nice and big full screen. They're little icons that sit in the corner of your heads up display in a video game. So you see them small, right?
Yeah.
So here we've not afforded a lot of room for any detail. Like the cork is literally just like 5 pixels here, whereas this one's made up of a ton of pixels, a lot more information. You really kind of got to balance that line in between detail and get pixel art. So this is probably a little bit too kind of crunky, a little bit too knobbly. On the other end, 120, it's probably a little bit too much. So usually I try and work in between 64 and 32 in that range, because I feel like it's a good sweet spot of like detail, but still pixel, right? So it's still pixel art, but I can still kind of sink my teeth into some level of detail. So that's the first thing that we kind of have to set up and decide before you start doing any work is like, what's the level of detail that you're going for? What's the pixel dimension size to detail ratio that you're kind of interested in working with? Number 2 is obviously going to be trying to like figure out what you're going to be doing with this and how you're going to work it in. So I've got a little sketch that I've prepared for this stream. And because, again, we've just come back from Japan, so I'm going to do a little kind of like bento like this. Again, like we've done a stream before on isometric pixel art, so it's kind of like SimCity perspective. With these kinds of things, I wouldn't ever really kind of go with a fully detailed scene or anything like that. I want to try and keep it simple so that it looks like it could be video game, but also it's going to fit well with pixel art. So I don't want any funny kind of angles or anything like that, because pixel art's going to struggle with that, as you guys will see when we get into this. But we're going to just go top down with a little bit of perspective and work with this kind of like setup of a bento box, which is perfect because it's these little compartments and boxes I can put stuff into, and then we can work it from there. And then we'll figure out tomorrow a way to kind of tie this into video games. But we'll start with this.
Nice.
So I've got a sketch, and I'm going to create a new file. So currently this sketch file is way too big, right? If I'm looking at this in mils, I'm going to switch to pixels on my screen. And here you can see that this standard A4 at 300 DPI in terms of pixels is 2,480. That's way too many pixels for pixel art. We're never going to be able to work with this. So I'm going to have to make a new file and create something that I'm going to say is going to be potentially like, we're going to maybe go something a little bit bigger, and we're going to go with, hang on, what's going on here? There we go. I'm going to go with I'm going to go with 300 by 300, just to give us a little bit of canvas room. Right? Again, I'm not going with like, 64 or anything like that, because I want a bit of breathing room. I can work inside of that. If it's too big, if it's too small, I can resize. That gives me a little bit of breathing room to work with like that. In fact, I'm actually going to go with 400 by 400. and
Right.
we'll call it square.
Do you always do a
There we go.
square?
Yeah, I always kind of like to start with a square just because then when I'm kind of working on a grid, I've got a nice kind of 45-degree diagonal. I can work inside a square. It also kind of fits well with this idea of like, if you want to think about it in the sense of we're going to do maybe like one of these little like things where there's going to be like an image in here, like a little sushi. And then next to that, there's going to be like, stats, like a stat bar of like strength, stamina, whatever, like how much this kind of replenishes. We might kind of tie it into video game in that way.
Yeah.
So that'll be kind of handy for just a little kind of square. It also makes sense because we're working with pixels which are square. So let's go with a square. It's just, we can change that later on. It's just like, this is not super, super crucial to like start with. It's just my personal preference of starting with a square.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our image here. At the moment, what this is going to do is it's going to do all the things that Photoshop would normally do and allow me to work in that way. It's just going to be a little bit low res because I've got such a low res file, right? So first thing I need to do is change this brush, which is my standard Photoshop brush, sketch brush, to something that's going to allow me to not have this happening. So if I zoom in here, what you'll notice is that this edge has got 4 different shades before it gets to white. So we've got pure black, very dark gray, lighter gray, super light gray, and then we got white. We don't want that. We want pixel art to be a clear delineation of color, not this kind of gradient smooth. So why Photoshop does that, even though I've got it set to a hard brush, right, is because if I didn't have that on, if I'm kind of painting from a distance, that looks like a nice clean edge. But if I'm kind of zooming in, you'll see that happening. If you don't have that, you'll get this really kind of horrible aliased edge that is not going to be really nice to look at. And we're going to start to get some issues with that. I'm sorry, they've moved it in here. And so I'll show you what that means if I move to the pencil brush. I'll come back to this in a sec. But
because normally you
this
want
is
that,
what we're
like 99% of the time, that's what you want.
Exactly, yeah. Like when I'm doing my like quote unquote normal work, I want that smoothness. I want the cleanliness, right? I want Photoshop to smooth things down for me so that I don't get this like horrible sharp edge that's happening here. But obviously, because I'm working with pixel art, I want that sharp edge. I don't want to have 4 levels of color in between my line and the outside of my line. So I'm going to need to work with the pencil brush. So depending on your update of Photoshop, the pencil brush might live up here in your toolbar, or recently they've moved it down into the actual toolbar. So if you press and hold on the regular brush and go down, you get the pencil tool. And the pencil tool acts like a brush. You can get different sizes, just like this. And I can boost it down to just 1 pixel. So 1 pixel is now literally going to give me just the 1 little square that I can work with. And that's the first step of kind of any pixel artwork, is to get your brush into brush mode at 1 pixel, right? So now we could potentially start kind of drawing out anything we want in here and try and get, some ideas of how this is going to work. But we still need to kind of figure out a few other things. So I'm going to bring in my sketch that I did, and we're going to run into a little issue potentially. Hang on, sorry. Here we go. Bring that into here. And obviously, because my sketch is huge, it's going to import in that and it's going to be enormous. Right. So when I scale that down, I'm potentially going to lose some information because I'm reducing so dramatically the amount of pixels in this image that I'm potentially going to be losing a fair bit of information in here. But let's see how that goes. I'm going to resize this to fit inside my kind of square canvas here. And I'm going to hit return. And then that's not too bad, right? I haven't lost too much information here, but now I can start to see what my pixel render is going to look like. And I can see that actually I'm probably going to be a little bit too big on my canvas. So I want to rescale this down even more. And this is a little bit of kind of trial and error, right? Where it's like I made a 400 by 400 canvas. I made it too big on purpose so that I could do this later on and kind of see, at what level am I happy to have this level of detail and pixel art in this artwork. And I feel like that's getting pretty close of like navigating that line in between detail versus this as actually kind of pixel art. Let's make this a little bit smaller still, and we're good to go. All right, so that's pretty good. And as you can see, I've dramatically reduced the size of this, but that's all good. There's no problem here. We can work with that. All right, so next thing I need to think about when I'm doing pixel art is what style of outline do I kind of want to work with. So in my drawings here, you can see, like, for instance, on this Gundam, I've got everything with kind of this like black outline, right? Like if I get rid of these colors, you'll see that everything is nicely kind of outlined in black. That's a little bit more kind of like a traditional drawing. On something like this, I've done an outline, but it's not quite black. It's a little bit more based on whatever color it's sitting next to. So that's another thing that we can think about when we're looking at kind of pixel art is how do we kind of get, if we're looking at the potions as well, you'll see that kind of thing, same sort of ideas happening here. The outline of the potion is just a darker version of the bottle. Outline of the cork is a darker version of the cork. That allows us a little bit more room for information without sealing everything in a black line. But the black line can be a nice stylistic approach as well. So you can kind of decide at this stage what it is that you're going for and how you're going to be working with this. I like to start just with a black outline and just get my drawing in nice and kind of clean, and then decide later on if I'm going to kind of be working with this with a colored outline with more kind of like painterly feel, or a more graphic outline with a kind of like black ink sealing kind of the artwork, or for even more kind of variety, a little bit of a mix of both.
Right.
So we'll see how that works. So let's go right in. I'm going to start kind of sketching this out. This is my main sketch. And then I'm going to go in here and call this is my shorthand for outline. It's just OTL. And now we can start to kind of get in on this drawing. I might drop the opacity of this sketch a little bit just for ease of use. And then we can start to get in on this. Now, before I start doing this, what you'll notice is that some of my pieces that I've done here, like this Gundam, I can see the pixel grid if I zoom in enough, right? I can see this grid of pixels happening if I zoom in enough. If I'm kind of zoomed out, it disappears. So I want that to happen, but it won't show if I've left it white. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to fill this with like a lightish gray, like maybe kind of
because the grid is white itself.
Because the grid is white, yeah. So I won't see the grid unless I've got a color happening already, which is not necessarily absolutely crucial, but it's handy for kind of just being able to see where your pixel strokes are going to go and where your brush is going to land and how that's going to work, right? So it's a nice kind of idea. You'll see probably artists, like concept artists, doing this anyways to like fill their canvas with gray just to get rid of the white, and it gets kind of rid of that kind of like the fear of the white canvas kind of thing. So that should be something that you could do anyways. But in this instance, it's also the sense of like, but now I can also see where my brush strokes are going to land and where each pixel is going to go, and I can build it like this. Right. So let's get stuck straight in. So we're going to start with, I'm just going to go with black, and I'm going to start with holding down Shift here. And I'm going to go straight around the contours of my bento box, like so.
We had it as we're doing that. So you're just holding down Shift as you're doing that?
I am, yeah. I'm holding down Shift and dragging that stroke down. We'll round this off a little bit later on as well, but just for the moment, just holding down Shift and trying to work in that way, just to kind of get a little bit more ease of use. The other thing I could do very easily is just click and then go and see where my next pixel is. So this is where the grid is handy, right? So I've stuck this pixel right here. So it's just one away diagonally from the other side. If I go over here, one away diagonally, I can just hold down shift and it draws the line for me. That's where kind of like seeing those pixels is super helpful.
And it just picks up from where you last like placed a pixel?
That's correct, yeah. So any point in between two lines, if I hold down shift and click somewhere else, it'll draw the straightest line it can in between those 2 points. As you can see, like this is what I was talking about before, where kind of we got some weird angles happening with pixel art. So as much as possible, try and work with kind of like isometric or angles that you know will work. Like 45-degree angle, for instance, is always great because it's just a 1-to-1 pixel, right? One up, one across, one up, one across, one up, one across, and so on. So that's a nice, clean, straight line in pixel art, or obviously vertical and horizontal is another one. But here you can see I've got these like weird arbitrary angles, and we've got 2 down, 1 across, 2 down, 1 across, 1 down, 1 across, 2 down, and it's just kind of a little bit more random. Obviously, if we zoom out, that's going to look like a nice straight line. But zooming in, it starts to be a little bit funky. There's ways around that. There's ways that you can use color to soften that down if you want to. That's a little bit more advanced. So we're just kind of doing like beginner tutorial here. So we won't necessarily talk about that too much today. But yeah, just be aware that you won't be able to do all the things that you would do, obviously, with normal line work and leveled detail. And that's one of the things that I really like about pixel art, is trying to figure out like, how do I communicate the same image, but with limited means.
Yeah.
And so now we can start to erase. So my eraser is over here. And this one, while Adobe has changed the brush to be having the pencil mode, the brush to have the pencil mode in the toolbar, the eraser tool is still up here. So you'll still need to go up to your mode here in the eraser tool and change that to pencil, because obviously we want the eraser to do the same thing as our brush. And we're going to go down to 1, stack these guys out of there. And this is one of those cool things with this, is up close, it looks weird, right? It looks like I've just done these unfinished corner lines.
Yeah.
From a distance,
it looks round.
It rounds it off. So one of the things that's cool with pixel art is that your eye like does a lot of the work for you in like reading what the image is. If you look at something like this, like any of these things can be kind of seen by your eye as like, oh, I get it, it's round, even though obviously the information fed to it is not that it's round. But from a distance, it's going to read as such. So again, it's one of those things that I really enjoy with pixel art, is trying to figure out how do you kind of showcase things without necessarily being able to draw them, because you won't necessarily be able to draw them, right? And so this little kind of device here is now making this a slightly more rounded edge. And we can round it off even more if we want to, by getting in there and kind of doing something like this, right? So that's going to round it off even more.
Looks like a Game Boy.
It does look like a little bit of a Game Boy, actually. You might have just given me a free idea there.
You're welcome.
What have I done? Here we go.
Game Boy bento box. It's pretty cool.
Game Boy bento box. Yeah, could put some like a little like D-pad here and some buttons later on. Make it a Game Boy bento box. All right. So again, we can round this off as much as we want. We can kind of start to see how we kind of do this or not. I'm going to leave it at just 1 for now. And then we can start to get the rest of these kind of compartments of this bento box in here. So this is also where I'm potentially going to have to start making sacrifices because of my chosen style of pixel art, right? So in my sketch, I've got a thickness of that kind of bento box, and those compartments have a certain thickness. But where in my sketch, I might just look at it and go, okay, it's this. That's not going to work for me at all because I'm doing outlines. If I was doing more painterly outlines, I could work with this. But because I'm doing this now, I'm going to need to do this at least 3 pixels wide so that I can have a pixel in the middle there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
So it looked really thick and like took over the scene. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I zoom out with that in there, if I kind of do this double line, it's not going to make sense. Like here, it's fine, but if I zoom out, all of a sudden you've got this big kind of black thing happening in your artwork. Doesn't make as much sense. So again, it's one of those things that you're going to have to figure out as you're doing your artwork. Of like, okay, I need to kind of make this bigger than I had originally anticipated, because my artwork's going to need to be it's going to need to showcase this idea of like, there's a separator there, and that separator has a certain amount of thickness to it. This is also where potentially, and don't be afraid to do this at this stage, because we're still early on. If you're figuring out at this stage that there's just way too many issues with the size of your pixels, and you're not able to do what you want to do with it, then this is still the time where you should be like, all right, I'm just going to resize my artwork, and that's it.
Right.
I'm going to try and make it so that my outline can fit across like 4 pixels instead of 3, sorry, because 3 is not an even number. So there's no kind of like working around that. If you do it 4, there's no middle, right? Like if I've got something that's 4 pixels wide and I want to put something in the middle, I can't. I'm stuck with that. So maybe it needs to be 5 pixels wide or 3 pixels wide, and then something can come out of the middle. So again, it's one of those weird kind of things with pixel art that you need to kind of make concessions potentially with. But for me, that's one of the kind of the fun aspects of pixel art.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, there was a question before that I had. What, Alessandra, what is something that you think will be hard but not impossible to turn into pixel art? Hard but not impossible. Like water, like underwater would be quite difficult.
Potentially. And again, like you can get some pretty hectic level of detail with any kind of pixel art, depending on, how detailed you're going with in your actual pixel art. So I wouldn't say that anything is by nature like impossible to do with pixel art. I would say that things like very detailed mechanical drawings and things like that, like if you were to do like a schematic of some like giant like Gundam or something, then you might struggle to get all the detail that you would want to if you were working with pixel art.
Yeah.
Anything organic is super easy to do with pixel art. Anything like a slice of cake or sushi in this case, or like a tree or a bush or any of those kinds of things, super easy to do.
That's interesting. You'd almost think it would be the opposite, because like on the outside, because you would think, oh no, it's like organic. You think you'd really want something technical, like, I don't know, like something geometric, something man-made.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, that's my experience, right? Of just like, this is easier to do with pixel art simply because it's just like just that organic level of detail is a lot easier to manage as kind of pixel art.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Interesting.
So I've screwed up my little soy sauce compartment here somehow, and I'm not sure how I'm going to fix this. So I'm trying to get a bit of a semicircle, and this is again where it's like, trying to figure it out and trying to do what's going to look like a nice clean semicircle, but still kind of work well. So sometimes I'll do this kind of thing and just draw the line, and it doesn't make sense. It's not even on both sides, and then try and fix it, right?
Yeah.
All right. So this is a good example to show as well, because what it then shows is when I'm drawing, like, let's say I'm going to do a circle. Let me just go in here and get a circle going. There we go. All right. So that obviously from up close is not a circle. From a distance is perfectly going to be a very legit circle. That's totally fine. But what we've got here is we've got, if I change the color here to something else so you can kind of see what's happening, what I've got is I've got 3, 3, 1, 1, 3, 3. That's a nice even kind of like 3, 3, 1, 1, 3, 3, right?
Right.
That's good. That's what you want. Here I've got this weird thing where I've got like 3, 4, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4. Like that's not the sequence that you want to get when you're trying to do these like kind of nice even round shapes. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start going into this and start trying to even this out a little bit by, first of all, getting rid of this sense of this, right? So as we say, we got 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, and that gives us a nice thing. What we don't want from a distance on a line like this, that's a nice kind of half circle line, right? If I all of a sudden start to have joining corners on this, then obviously my line's going to be a little bit uneven, but it's also going to appear to be thicker. So your eye is going to be fooled into like this is thicker because all of a sudden now we've got these like clumps of color. So we generally want to avoid doing this when you're doing corners in pixel art. You want to avoid having this happen. You want to get rid of these little corner guys, and that's going to give you a nice kind of cleaner look to what you're trying to do. So I'm going to do that first and foremost. So I'm going to get rid of any one of these kind of adjoining corners. 1, 2, 3, there we go. And we can do it on the other side of this too. And now I can zoom out and see kind of how I like this, how I don't like this. And here we can see like the bottom is kind of cool. The top has got this weird little extra thing happening here that's making kind of like an illusion in my eye, and I'm not really loving it. So I'm going to undo that one. I'm going to bring that down to here. And now I've got a nice even. I've got 3, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 3.
Right.
And that's nailed it. All right. That's a nice even curve throughout the entire process.
Do you ever like grab a curve like that and you're like, damn, that's a sweet curve. I'm going to put that over here in my curve box and just reuse the like lines and shapes and kind of start from that rather than drawing from scratch? Or
is
that not
100%.
in the...
You would totally do that.
Right.
Yeah. Or you could do like what I did earlier and just grab a circle.
Yeah.
Right. And then just start erasing around the inside of that circle, getting rid of these corners again, right? And then just kind of like surgically remove that end of the line and use that as a circle.
Like
right?
that
Use that as my shape. And then I can just kind of go like, cool, I want this, not any of this stuff. And now I can use this somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Now you'll notice something has just happened here, which brings me to the next little tip of like setup that you need to do for pixel art. As I said before, like we're probably not going to do heaps of actual creating today because pixel art does require a few little kind of like tweaks and options and setting up your tools in certain ways. And it's one of the things actually that like I keep kind of bringing this up every time we do this, but if in a future like Photoshop update, your workspaces that you have up here, because you can save different kind of like default workspaces, they don't save your tool presets. Being able to just swap to pixel art and have all this stuff that I'm doing with my brushes and my selection tools and transform and stuff that you'll see later on, being able to just swap that to like this loadout for Photoshop. It's like the pixel art loadout. That would be awesome rather than having to do it kind of manually. But if you'll notice what's happening here is I've got these kind of like ghost pixels down here that have happened when I've made my selection. It's not just done a nice clean selection. You can see it down here too. I've got these kind of like faded kind of ghost pixels that are happening. The reason that has happened is because like with our paintbrush in Photoshop is trying to smoothen things off for us and like get rid of this sharp jagged edge that is pixel art, which you want in pixel art. What I'm going to have to do to all my selection tools that are not the rectangle selection tool is I'm going to have to untick anti-alias up here. So in the top left corner of the toolbar, in my lasso tool, there's a little thing here called anti-alias. So if I have that unticked, what it's doing, it's not showing you this, but what it is doing is it's selecting a little bit of the stuff outside of this selection just to smoothen it down. And so when I move that selection, it's grabbed some of the stuff and trying to like soften it up. If I untick anti-alias, I'll probably have to do this selection again. Now when I move it, it's going to be a nice clean break. There's not going to be any ghost pixels. All right. Same thing happens with my circle selection tool. Right. So my round selection tool here, if I've got that anti-alias on and I'm going to do a perfect circle and fill that, you'll see that I've got this like non-pixel art edge that's happened.
Yeah.
I need to make sure that that's unticked anti-alias. And now when I fill, it will give me the nice pixel art edge. So that's it. You don't need to do this for the rectangle selection tool because the rectangle selection tool, is just, whoops, what's happening? My brain isn't functioning. There we go. It's just straight or up or down, right? So it's already a hard edge. So there's no option to untick anti-aliasing here.
Right.
But all your other selection tools, you'll have to make sure that anti-aliasing is unticked, even your polygon lasso tool, because if you don't, again, polygon lasso tool is going to try and smoothen things down for you, and you'll get this effect.
Even the lasso
So even
tool.
though the polygon lasso tool is actually a straight edge, you'll still have to untick anti-aliasing. The only one you don't have to do it to is the rectangle tool.
Yeah, right. There you go.
Yeah. So back to our line work. So I've kind of made the bulk of this little bento here. One of the things, again, that you'll have seen me do is here I had this as the edge of the kind of the paper wrapping for this chopstick, but I've got this little kind of like leftover orphan pixel here. That's not very nice. So again, that's just one of those things. I'm going to have to extend that and make it come down to here. And then that still looks like a sharp edge, but I've got a bit of a cleaner kind of line happening. And then we've got chopsticks. 1, 2, bang. And then...
So you got to be careful with anything that's too thin, right? You got to make sure you have enough room and enough negative space.
If I'm doing outlines, the thing has to be at least 3 pixels wide because I'm going to need edges and a middle, right? And in this sense, I've made it 1 pixel from the edge on both sides, but that looks a bit funny. So maybe my chopsticks can actually afford to be 2 pixels wide in the inside, and that's good. Now I've got a pixel on either side, pixel in the middle, 2 pixels. My chopsticks are even, and they look like they're nicely kind of spread out, not too kind of thin in the actual artwork.
Nice.
If that wasn't the case, I would just make my little kind of chopstick bag a little bit wider or 1 pixel shorter, try and get that kind of to be even again. Should probably save at this point. It's a good idea.
40 minutes in, quick save.
Yep. Cool. And now we can start to kind of draw in the rest of this. So at this stage, what I can do is I can start to think about potentially what kind of line work I'm going to want for each one of these. And I'm going to swap to a different layer because I want the outline of the bento to be on one and then the rest to be on a different one, because I might kind of mess around with the colors of this later on. So first things first is I'm going to do this little kind of like deep fried prawn, little tempura prawn. And again, like you can see, this is an absolute mess right now. That doesn't matter. Right now, I'm just trying to get a sense of like what's going where and how. Then I can come back later and fix it. That's no problem. All right. So this is very just much me just being like real messy, but not caring.
Right.
Because I don't have to yet, because I'm just trying to get something onto the page before starting to worry about like, all right, fix this, fix that. And that I think is probably a good tip for any kind of art, not just pixel art, is, you know, get the something on the page.
Just start.
Then then worry about like how it all kind of looks or how it's going to kind of how you can fix it, quote unquote. now I'm going to do these little Mackie rolls. They're perfect circles, but they're in perspective. So I'm going to do a fill here. I've got a selection. I'm going to do a fill, reselect this, and smash it down in perspective.
That's cool.
There we go. So it's not always perfect. There's a little bit of kind of unevenness, but it's a good start. It's a good base for me to begin with.
And if you got one side right, you can kind of copy that side and go, oh, that side looks right. I'll fix up the other side in a bit. It's a bit better than just drawing it pixel by pixel each time.
Exactly. So that has shown me the next problem setup that I need to work with Photoshop and doing pixel art, which is I've still got these ghost pixels, right? Even though my selection is definitely ticked off anti-alias, because the transform tool is also doing the Photoshop thing of trying to smooth everything out for me. Right. So when I hit return, it will also smoothen it down for me when I expand or decrease it. So what I need to do is when I've got my selection, I can hit Command T, and up here where it says interpolation, by default, Photoshop is set to bicubic automatic. And that's trying to give you this kind of smooth edge. I want it to be nearest neighbor. And that, when I drop it down, will keep the pixel art edge that I'm looking for. So it's the equivalent of like anti-aliasing, but for your selection tool. So this is what I mean by like, it would be cool to be able to kind of do this just with a quick button loadout in Photoshop, because anytime I swap from pixel art back to all this work, I need to remember to like swap all my tools back to the other setting, because I don't want it to remain like that for my normal artwork, right?
Yeah.
So it can be a little bit kind of funky sometimes to try and remember like, oh, right, why is my transform tool doing this? Oh, because I forgot I needed to be on this particular setting and not this one. And it can be a little bit kind of like, okay. But again, just like this, just that setup that you have to do with pixel art in Photoshop. And it's not the end of the world, but it's just something that you need to be aware of doing.
Yeah.
And now I can go in and erase inside here. So I've just gotten Photoshop basically to do the bulk of the work for me in this circle, and get that nice kind of clean ellipse. And then, as you said, I just go in and clean it up later on. And I can just clean that up. And then I'm going to extend that out over here. 1, 2. In fact, before I do that, I'm going to grab this section and duplicate that over to be the other side of my Mackie roll, and then that can go and link up. And then all I got to do is take that one and duplicate it, and we're good.
Nice.
Work smarter, not harder. So I got my 2 identical little Mackie rolls. You can see actually that when I zoom out, they actually kind of look a bit dented on the top and bottom. So I'm not loving this particular stroke here that I've done. So I'm going to have to extend that a little bit on both counts. And 1 pixel can make a huge difference here.
Yeah. And there was a question as well, Alessandra's asking, so do you only use the pencil tool to do pixel art?
Yep.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Because it's the only tool that allows you to do this kind of like very smooth work. You could just do it like, if you were a little bit of a crazy person, you could just do it all with the rectangular selection tool and literally like select every pixel one by one and then fill them in. But again, you'd be mad to do that. You could do this in Illustrator as well. One of the cool things about pixel art is that normally I'm using like my Wacom and just a tablet and a pen like this. You could totally do all of this with a mouse, because it's not really drawing in the same way.
Right.
It's more akin to just kind of like image building. So you could totally do this with a mouse and you'd be absolutely fine. So yeah, if you don't have a tablet, you can still go nuts with pixel art.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we've got the bulk of the artwork that I needed to do here. I'm just going to change the color of that artwork just so I can kind of see it a little bit more clearly. I hit Command U, brings up this menu that I just love. I use this all the time, hue saturation. And I'm going to hit colorize. I'm going to lighten and bring that into kind of like a warm, like food color like this. And then I can kind of see the difference in between my box and the food that's in it. So now we can start to kind of try and figure out how we're going to do this and how it's going to work. So one of the advantages that I kind of find when working with pixel art is normally I would have outlines and colors on separate layers because of selection purposes, because of a whole bunch of different things happening with Photoshop. Being able to change colors on the fly without affecting line work and so on is going to be a little bit tricky. But with pixel art, because we've got this sense of like line work and pixel art that are clearly delineated by the pixels we've created, I don't have to worry about that as much. I don't have to think about it. So I could actually do all of this on the same layer and still be able to come in and make selections of those pixels quite perfectly.
Right.
Using the magic wand, which would also need to have its anti-aliasing thing ticked off, otherwise it's going to have the same issues. I can very easily just select these pixels very, very cleanly and have no issues around that. So let's start by coloring these kind of this tempura prawn, and that'll probably take us to the end of the stream, and then tomorrow we can look at kind of like highlights, shading, and kind of filling that in. Right?
Cool.
So I've decided here that I was going to go with something a little bit more kind of like a colorful outline, a bit more painterly, not sealed in black everything. So I'm going to work with that, and I'm going to get my kind of sketch to go away. I'm going to leave that here, and I'm going to do everything on the same layer just to kind of show you guys how that's going to work. So let's pick a kind of a tempura-ish kind of main color. We got this like orangey kind of gold color for the main, and then this kind of like darker color for the outside. So it can also help here to work from a distance because it'll kind of show you what you're doing a little bit better and where you're kind of messing up or not. So you kind of want to be a little bit away from your artwork so you can kind of see what you're doing a little bit better. At least that's the case with pixel art.
Yeah.
And then let's get this like this prawn tail color happening in here. Got a little bit of a pink. That'll do. Yeah, that'll do. If in doubt, you just get a photo of some tempura prawns or whatever and just like use that as reference for color. If you're not too sure how to get these colors kind of going, you could absolutely do something like that. That's totally cool. Cool. So I'm pretty kind of happy with the level of detail of this. We got some like bits of kind of tempura coming off of it. And I want to get probably this brown that I have is maybe a little bit too dark. So I want to eyedrop this and go in and kind of select a darker color for this. When you're using yellows, by the way, never, ever, 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 digitally or analog, if you're using like paint tubes, never just add black to yellow, because as you can see here, the further down you go, you're going to get this horrible like baby diarrhea color.
What if you're illustrating baby diarrhea?
Well, then sure, go for it. But normally what you want is to bring some red into it, and then you can go down to the kind of the darker areas. But you want to bring in that kind of like warmth in before you go a little bit kind of darker value.
That's a good tip.
I don't know why, but like yellow just like hates it when you just add black. In general, if you're doing shading, I would just recommend you should avoid just going like, oh, it's a darker version of a color, add black. It's never really going to be the best way to do it. There's always going to be a slightly more kind of like interesting way to create that color.
Yeah.
But especially with yellow, you just don't want that at all. All right. So you can see here why, like I was talking about, saying like organic is easier to work with, because it's allowing me to do just kind of whatever I want and not really have to think about how this is looking too much. Whereas something a bit more structured is going to be a little bit more kind of problematic in that sense. And I will actually do my highlights on a separate layer just so that I can control the opacity of them a little bit better. So I'm going to go in with a white and bring some white into here and drop the opacity down. And we're starting to get a little bit of volume happening on our kind of tempura prawn.
It all kind of kicks in once you start doing the highlights or shadows.
Yeah,
right?
Now you can kind of see that happening and kind of how that's working, right? Yeah, it's real crunchy. So again, I could, if I wanted to, I could see kind of how that looks if I bring in like a really solid ceiling kind of black outline to this, and seal all of this in that outline to kind of see how that looks and goes. But I think it might be a little bit too much for this.
Might get a bit busy. Everything's a bit tight together.
Yeah, it would add clarity.
Yeah.
But it would potentially take away from the kind of the pixel art painterly vibe that I'm trying to go for here. So for this one, I wouldn't do it. But as you saw on the Gundam that I did, like it's absolutely like a viable thing to do depending on kind of how graphic and how much kind of work you're putting into it. So it can actually be done, but again, depends on the style that you're going for. Let's get in a little bit more of this tempura happening in here. In fact, let's try and get this rice going. So let's get this color. Whoops. And when you're doing rice, obviously white, like you don't want pure white. You want a kind of like a bluish off-white, maybe a bit more desaturated.
Right.
Simply because you want to save white for like any other highlight. Like pure white, just like pure black, is almost never occurring in nature.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you really want to kind of go like, oh, white is, rice is white. It's like, no, it's got a color to it.
Yeah.
It's got something happening in it. And with the other colors in my artwork happening, that very, very light kind of blue will appear white. So I don't need to worry about it.
We will need to call it there. We've only got about a minute left. So thank you for today. Thank you everyone in chat watching live and all those watching on replay as well over on YouTube, hence. We'll be back tomorrow. So we're going to pick up where we left off from today and continue on. So I hope you guys can all join us. It's 12 p.m. Australian Daylight Saving Time. And basically the same time that we started today, but tomorrow, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully.
Awesome. All right. Bye, everyone.